Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is Substantiating Claims for Electrical Products. So specifically, we'll be looking at consumer electrics, so anything from hair straighteners to hair dryers, and then microwaves and appliances and washing machines, basically anything a consumer would have that's an electrical product. So there's claims obviously that you can make about these kinds of products, which can be anything from their opinion to sort of scientific facts behind them. So we're going to look at some of those claims as well. This webinar is being recorded and there is going to be a Q&A towards the end. So if you've got any questions as we go through, please feel really free to put them in the Q&A box and I'll be happy to answer those towards the end. So yeah, specifically, we'll be looking at an overview of kind of consumer electronics industry to make us think about, what this industry is all about. We'll be looking at global regulations for advertising in general, because there's not necessarily specific rules for advertising consumer electronics, but you do need to be aware, obviously, about all the rules that if you're making any advertising claims, you need to be aware of. Then we'll be looking at those sort of successful claims and how they're substantiated. So specifically consumer research and looking at some case studies so we can see what the design and methodology would be for those kinds of studies as well. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm the Regulatory Director at Ayton Global Research. So I've been working at the company about 8 years now, and I've obviously tested a whole range of products with clients and looked at how we can substantiate their claims, particularly for electronics. There's plenty of products we've kind of looked at in that field as well. So yeah, there's certainly in a good position to be able to talk to you today about what the regulations are behind those claims, the kind of claims that we've kind of substantiated in the past to get you kind of thinking about them, and how they're evidenced essentially. So just to give an overview and just to start thinking about, consumer electronics and what kind of products we're talking about and everything about it really. I just wanted to look at the products market. And see if there's some sort of excerpts from news articles and market research to give you an idea of what this industry is like. So it's obviously a really fast growing industry. I think it is going to always be one of the fastest growing industries because at the end of the day, like compared to, lots of products, even things like cosmetics and stuff like that, they've been around for hundreds of years. Whereas the consumer electronics market is something that had a big boom, not really that long ago in terms of decades, if you think about compared to a lot of other consumer products. But as the development is crazy, really. If you think about what kind of phones we had 10 years ago compared to what we have now, and just how our life really revolves around having the newest, the best electronic product, it will continue to grow like this. So at the moment, the electronics market is over $1 trillion, which is huge compared to a lot of webinars I've done about other categories. It really is huge. And there's going to be another growth of over 7% over the next 6 years, which again is a really large growth. Basically, as I was saying, it's really about innovation. That's why I think it grows so quickly. People want to have the most innovative product, the most innovative electric product, and have something new. I said the best thing. It's really what consumers are interested in, is having, the best innovation. Things like smartphones, smart wearables have been huge, and all home appliances. Again, I think people really are into having these really high-tech home appliances where maybe they weren't so much a few years ago, which is really interesting. So it's another sort of thing to think about is where that growth is going to be. So Asia Pacific, I always say specific, Asia Pacific is bet to have the highest growth. So obviously where there's higher income coming into those countries, but also you think about Japan, China, and Taiwan, that's where most of these products are made. They've got huge factories for making consumer electronics, huge R&D facilities. So really that's where you see a lot of it. But also there's a huge demand for things like smartphones in places like India. Certainly from our volunteer base, the kind of way we have to work with volunteers is much more on a smartphone compared to any other country. That's what people were using over there. So for people to do their studies, they're going to be using smartphones, and everybody has sort of 2 smartphones. It's quite interesting. And the market growth in North America and Europe is also going to be huge, just not quite as big as those other countries. So if that's where you're developing your consumer electronics, make sure you think about where, the market is really growing and where you maybe should be selling your products. There's a nice little diagram there from Global Market Insights as well, which kind of shows where the market is looking to be. So, the Europe market, even they're saying, overall it's going to be 7%, but there's a bigger growth in the Asia Pacific market of over 8%, whereas it's 6.5% in Europe. So it gives you an idea, still lots of growth, but bigger growth in Asia Pacific. There's also going to be an impact from COVID-19, and I always want to talk about that at the moment. It's a huge part of our lives, and even though things are getting better, we're very optimistic. We do need to think about how this has had an impact on the industries, and what we should be thinking about. So it has had a big impact, an adverse impact on the consumer electronics sector. Of course it will. And like a lot of other industries as well, a lot of that is to do with the shortage of raw materials, stopping this innovation, stopping this production. Which is also catching back up now, but there has been just these huge kind of delays in what we're expecting for innovation. So you can see sort of the really big players like Samsung and Apple and LG had to suspend their production, which is going to have a really negative impact. The thing is, it says, and this is back in August, I quite like this excerpt that said the market is expected to regain momentum in Q1 of 2021. Well, that's what we're in now. So hopefully all that kind of impact that we've seen over last year will start to regain its momentum, and there'll be big product developments going on and lots of things like testing that's going to be needed. So things to consider there. So that's kind of the market, to give you a very short summary, basically, and kind of get you thinking about what the market is. But the most important thing that we now need to think about is, okay, so if we're going to sell our product in Asia Pacific, what can we say about the product and what do we need to be aware of in terms of the regulations? So advertising self-regulation is always going to be the most important thing to be wary of in the countries that you're selling your product. So it's all very well and good to sort of say, I want to sell my product in Europe and North America and Malaysia and China and Japan, but you need to be really aware of what the regulations are going to be to sell there. So you can make amazing claims about your products, but know that you're going to be fully compliant while doing it. So the first step is always to look at what the advertising self-regulation organizations are in those countries, and they all have them. And if they don't, they have advertising laws, but that's a whole other ballgame. The first thing to look for is for the SRO, or self-regulatory organization. So basically it's a way for the industry to regulate itself, quite self-explanatory. So instead of having to have federal organizations, kind of police adverts, the idea is that everyone reads the code of conduct and everyone is just compliant. And we all kind of work together to make sure that we don't have to be policed, and that we're legal, we're decent, honest and truthful to our consumers. It's a really good image to have on your brand anyway. So it's one of those things that, you legally have to do it, but instead of trying to get away with having misleading adverts, think about who you want to be as a brand and make sure you're following these, because that's what the code's really out there to do. If you go against the code, it tends to work out, every country's a little bit different, but it tends to all work out on the same basis globally, which is that there tends to be a complaints platform. So if you're a consumer and you're kind of, you use an electronic product and it maybe says, 4 hours battery life or something like that, and actually use it and you go, I haven't had that. It didn't last very long, not very happy. It means that you can complain about it to the organizations in the country that you're based. And they'll investigate it and make sure there's some evidence behind that claim. Essentially, you think about claims like that. If you have that evidence behind it, well, great, because it just means they're an odd case. It's not you that's done anything wrong. You've got all the research behind you and you've said it right. But if you haven't got any evidence behind you, that is when you could get into trouble. So you can have to, at the very least, your adverts have to be removed, which you think if your advert is on your pack copy, that means a product recall, which isn't great. But at the very least, your products have to be removed. And then other countries have varying penalties. So it could be things like fines, even jail time, depending on how misleading your advert is and what you've put out there and what country you're in. So you need to be really, really wary. The other side is that your competitors might complain about your product. So again, if it was something like 4 hours battery life and one of your competitors had made a very similar product but hadn't been able to get that battery life, they'll probably question it and ask the advertising authorities to look into it, because essentially they want to be able to say those things about their products too. it keeps everything a level playing field and making sure, everyone's saying what they can say about their products, essentially. So there's three parts of the industry: the advertisers who pay for the advertising agencies responsible for its form and content, so your marketing teams, and the media that carry it. So if you're any part of that kind of process in advertising, you need to be aware of the code of conduct. The media that carry it is an interesting one. If you're a distributor and you've got many brands on your website, you need to make sure that the adverts you've got on your website are still going to be compliant. So make sure that, if there's any claims that you're selling with the products that you're selling on your website, it's up to you as well to make sure they're compliant. So it's just kind of the overview there to give you an idea, because it's kind of a global situation. Instead of being so specific, it's kind of saying, well, this is out there and that's what you need to look at. And there's a couple of links that I've put in, so a couple of kind of resources. First one is the International Chamber of Commerce. They have a framework that these countries can adopt for their own self-regulatory organizations. So they're a really good starting point, because you can see which countries are part of that. It's about 52 countries that have taken on that framework. And because it's a framework, it's all, as I said, this kind of legal, decent, honest, and truthful. How do they write the code to mean those things? It's a really good place to start and see what people are doing similarly, because the great thing is a lot of countries have a very similar code of conduct. So generally, if you're compliant in one of those countries, and the other ones have got the same kind of framework, you're going to be pretty safe in the other ones. And it's the same with ICAS as well, which is the International Council of Ad Self-Regulation. They are like a network of other SROs as well, so global network. So it's a really good place to look at what their members are, and see what countries are a part of that. They put out news and things like that as well, which is really helpful. So that's kind of the overview for ad self-regulation, just to get you thinking about what you're saying about your products and making sure it's compliant. So what I kind of wanted to do as well is pick up one of those. So the ASA is the Advertising Standards Authority in the UK. Again, this is part of the ICC, part of ICAS. So it's one of those really good representative advertising authorities, and it's really good for us to look at. I'm based in the UK, so it's a good place for me to look, because it's really easy for me to access all their resources. So they've got loads of information on there, and this is what I wanted to bring up specifically was, are there any specific advertising regulations for consumer electronics? But no, there aren't, but you do need to make sure you're sticking to the general rules. So anything to making sure that an advert is not misleading, so no claims without evidence, harmful, so not saying things that could put people in harm, or offensive, because obviously you don't want to offend people with your advert. That is doing the opposite of what your product should be trying to sell. So they kind of, overall, look at the code of conduct. You must be abiding all of the rules for the codes, but obviously there's nothing specific for for consumer electronics. But they did have a couple of really helpful bullet points, which again will apply to any country. So also think about the safety of electronics and machinery, because it's going to be one of those things that it's one of those kind of industries that could put people in harm if they're not using these products correctly. So always think about the safety of the product before putting it out there. So anything to do with protective equipment, again, that's probably not so much with consumer electronics necessarily, but if there was, you need to make sure it's shown in the adverts, because if people don't see it in the advert, they're not going to think to wear protective equipment. Even when it comes to things like, I don't know, garden shears or something like that, hedge trimmer, that all comes under this industry, and you need to be making sure that people are really safe. You need to make sure that anything about guarantees or warranties or after sale service is communicated really clearly. So different kind of claims to necessarily how the product performs, but it's something, again, that's really specific to electronics, and something to think about is always things like warranties and guarantees, and make sure that's always communicated really clearly. And also I think that's the same thing about things like full terms and conditions with guarantees. There is, in Europe, for example, there is I can't remember what the law is now off the top of my head, but it's something to do about the warranty, essentially, that every person in Europe is guaranteed, I think it's like a year after purchasing an electronic product. So even if it's outside of their warranty, you need to communicate what other kind of rights your consumer has about the sort of lasting warranty of your product. So sort of food for thought, I thought, I thought, with what kind of regulations are out there specifically for electronics. I also wanted to really touch on comparison claims, because it's one of those industries where we see a lot of comparison claims. So there is obviously really strict regulations surrounding these. And again, I've got some really good information from the ASA, really similarly for all countries around the globe. So it doesn't matter too much when you're thinking of selling. It's a really good, helpful resources there. So comparisons are usually to compare things like the quality, it's better than such and such, price, cheaper than, or performance, goes faster, or, it could be sort of a smartphone or something, it performs faster, that kind of thing. And better selling, things like market share. So things that are much more sort of desk-based research. So that's the kind of thing that we're looking at when it's about comparison claims, basically. Generally, you're looking at, a marketer's own products. So it might be, if it's the new iPhone, it might be better than the previous model, or it's something that's to do with your competitor. So I don't know, Huawei, or however you spell it, is cheaper and better performing, has a better camera than the latest Samsung. I don't know. That's not something that I specialize in, but it gives you an idea of what kind of claims we're looking at. You need to be really careful about saying things like the best or the leading or the cheapest, because you're basically saying you're going against the whole market. So generally you kind of see it against one or two products specifically rather than a whole market, because that's fine, you can do it, but you need to have a hell of a lot of evidence, which is really looking at the whole market, especially when you're saying it's the best. It's a hard one to substantiate. Whereas if you have something like no better than, you're basically saying you're kind of level with the other competitors rather than better than them. So yeah, it's something to really think about when you're looking at comparisons. And essentially the main thing is you always need evidence to substantiate these claims. Direct comparison is the best thing you can do. Have consumers use one and then the other. What are your thoughts on the performance of those? There's a lot of information I can tell you about comparison testing, which I won't go into detail today, but I do have a webinar which is all about that. So if you want to see that at all, do let me know. So how do we substantiate these claims? We've been talking about claims a lot, but the most important thing is getting that evidence that I've mentioned. It doesn't really matter what kind of product it is. It doesn't really matter where you're selling. If you're saying something about your product, you need to have some kind of evidence behind it to say that it does what you're saying it does. And a really good way of getting that is through consumer research, particularly, I have to say, within the consumer electronics industry, because a lot of it is opinion-based, and that's what consumer studies are, consumer perception. They're assessing these products. When you're saying, is this the best iPhone you've ever used? Well, that's an opinion. But if you have a huge base of volunteers test it and a lot of them agree with it, it's fantastic advertising for you. And it's the same, with lots of consumer electronic products. We've had things like facial like electronics that do things, I don't really understand them, but they do something to the face, and then it's the appearance of your face after. That's again what consumers can really review, essentially. So generally you're looking at things like in-home consumer studies. So people are sent products to test at home. Again, really important for consumer electronics, because that is how they use them. They use them in their own home. They become part of their lifestyle. They're introduced into their routine. So it's making sure we get that feedback, which is very specific to what these kinds of products are for. And as I said, they reflect the actual conditions of the product in use. So it's all very good having people come into a lab and say, okay, everybody use this Hoover. How do you think, what do you think is a good suction or whatever? Maybe not necessarily going to give you the best feedback, because they, haven't really used it as they would when they were at home in their own home. So it really reflects the actual conditions of the product in use. And we talked a little bit about comparing, and again, that's something we can really reflect through consumer research. For other claims, you may need additional evidence, and this is really, when it comes to consumer electronics, this is going to be to do with things like the performance, and I've got some examples of those kinds of claims, I think, on the next page. No, I'll come back to that. We've got some examples of that. If things like, if we're looking at a car, for example, and you're saying it does a certain amount of miles to the gallon, well, it's not really fair to get consumers to assess that. It's something scientific. specific that's to do with the kind of production of it. So we can always help with that kind of thing. If there's claims you want to make about your product and there's anything we kind of think actually that needs to have a different type of research, we can really assist with that as well. But generally, a lot of things when you're looking at consumer electronics would be very easy to substantiate through consumer research. So what other reasons are there though? So I kind of want to we're looking at claims, we're really talking about claims today, but the good thing about consumer research is because you're sending these products out to people anyway, get them to assess more than just the claims, get more out of your data, because really the point of claims is to elevate your marketing. How else can you elevate your marketing? And that's kind of what I want to think about as well. So it really should be a part of your new product development process. So, as you're manufacturing these products, as you're thinking about your claims, think about what kind of feedback you want to get back for your product development, because it might be that you do this study kind of like doing your claims, but actually what you're more interested in is what is the best thing people like about this product? How can we change our marketing? How can we change the way we develop it to suit the people that we're targeting with their feedback? What are they saying about it that we can now use to make our product even better? So things like product and brand perceptions really falls into that. What did you like the most? What did you like the least? This kind of thing. All quite straightforward. Gathering things like testimonials and reviews as a part of that. Looking at packaging design, looking at the price points you're expecting, getting things like photos and videos of people using these products. It's all really, really helpful research for you. So we can also look at things like benchmark testing, as I mentioned. So, against your competitors, but also look at your suppliers, maybe, think about all these kinds of things. So there's a lot we can think about. Kind of examples of consumer claims there. We've got 88% of people agree their life has been made easier. So that could be something like, a new microwave or a new Hoover, as I say. 9 out of 10 people agree there's no better product. I mentioned that earlier in a comparison. 96% of people agree the product is effective without causing damage. That could be something kind of going along the lines of things like a hair straightener or a hairdryer or something like that. So yeah, kind of ideas that you can get really easy substantiated claims through these studies. So I wanted to look at these kinds of basically how these claims are displayed, these kinds of products, and what kind of thing we've got there. So this is where I mentioned earlier, I've got some examples of some claims that maybe aren't through consumer research, but it gives you an idea of the kind of claims that are out there on these consumer electronics and how they've been substantiated, because then you have to put on your website what that evidence came from, just to, really help prove it's real. Let's not get investigated as well if you've got all that evidence on there. So we've got a Samsung washing machine, and they've got a really interesting claim to say that it is high-speed spinning that removes 99.9% of odor-causing bacteria. So I find this quite interesting because the washing machine is doing it through how it works, rather than, I think of you using a really good laundry detergent or something like that would be how you get rid of that. But this one was on a study which was conducted by Intertech, and they were looking at basically the bacteria that was inside the machine before and after washing. So very high kind of scientific study looking at bacteria. We've got a hair straightener, so Dyson, which are kind of becoming very prominent with their hair products, very, very pricey hair products, but apparently they work. So it's great to see that they've got some evidence behind it as well. So this one, they had two substantiated claims here. So 50% less breakage and reduced frizz and fewer flyaways. So these are the things that they've had to substantiate there. Oh, and less heat and half the damage. That's kind of how they worded that as well. So all those claims about the damage were all done with measuring the hair strength when creating an equivalent hairstyle. So when straightening the hair, what was the hair strength before and after compared to other products? And then we also had direct image analysis of treated and untreated hair. So again, how was the frizz and flyaways before using the product and after using the product? And they went for an image analysis on that one as well. And we've also got the Ninja air fryer, which I've seen a lot of. It's quite a trending product. So they said that they've got 75% less fat than the traditional frying methods. As you can see, it's just tested against deep fried hand cut French fries. So it's quite easy for them to say, what kind of fat content was in a traditional frying and what is in theirs. So it's a really good claim for them as well. We also need to think about claims and labels and packaging. So, specifically on the products that you're putting out there. I think I wanted to bring this on specifically for electronic products, because you do see a lot of claims on the actual packaging and the boxes and things like that, especially related to things like performance. So make sure that they're all substantiated, because again, they will come under the same codes for the advertising authority. It doesn't have to just be for online. You still need to have every claim substantiated and have every claim evidenced, whether it's on your packaging or if it's, online or something like that. Great. So now I wanted to talk about a case study in particular, about a study that we've conducted, for a consumer electronic, and sort of go through the study design there, so you can have a just basically have an outline of once you know you have to do consumer research, what kind of claims are you getting, how are you going to substantiate them. So this is for a hair straightener, so quite a common consumer electronic, especially for women. That is very, very much a part of people's styling routine. So for this one, we wanted to gain substantiate some consumer claims and gain some additional feedback. We also wanted things like testimonials and before and after photos. As I was saying earlier, use this as a chance to get some really good marketing material as well, not just to substantiate your claims. But in particular, this is where I was kind of saying earlier, those examples, you want to say that it's effective at straightening the hair, but not making the hair look or feel damaged. That's what you're looking for in a straightener, is for it to look nice and healthy still. So we had a study protocol for this. It was conducted in the UK, a single placement, which means we just had one product. So just the hair straighteners they're reviewing, not used with anything else. We're just looking at the hair straighteners. It was a 14-day study, which is fine because people regularly straighten their hair that we recruited. So we knew they'd use it quite a lot of times to be able to review it. We wanted to make sure they had at least chin length hair, just so we could get a really good analysis of, how the straight the hair was, whether it's short or cropped. You might not get the same style, be able to see, the smoothness of the product and things like that. We did gather before and after photos. Fortunately, I can't share them with you because they are the intellectual property of our clients. But it was a great way to be able to look at this further and say, okay, the hair is, obviously much straighter. It looks really healthy. But what were the results that I can show you some examples of that we've got, and just to give you an idea of how the questions are worded and how we can look at making those into claims. So this came from our report, which we basically have a summary table at the end. We've got all the questions, which should be basically verbatim to the claim, which is why they're worded like statements. Ask people if they agree or disagree, and then see what we're left with. So you can see the questions, the number of people that are satisfied, neutral, or not satisfied, and then the percentage of people that were satisfied, neutral, or not satisfied. So to give you an idea of how these claims were kind of worded, we've got like 91% of people said the straighteners leave their hair feeling smooth, soft, and shiny. So it's a lovely words there that are really nice for the consumer to agree with. And again, they're giving us that real opinion of this hair, not just being straight, but looking really nice and shiny and healthy. They're a unique type of straightener. So another kind of claim, not about the effects that the product is giving. As I said, this is a very innovative market, consumer electronics. So if you've got people agreeing that it's a really innovative product, it's a really unique product, it can really help with your marketing there as well. We've got professional straight results. Again, a comparison of something. So if they were to get their hair done professionally, do they feel like they achieved those results at home? And as I mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that their hair feels healthy still. And we had some really good results for that as well. So these are all really fantastic results they can now use in their marketing. I want to think about the legislation behind it. I know I mentioned earlier, we talked a lot earlier about global advertising regulations. So what do those codes specifically look like? Because I was saying a lot about the code that people have. And this is a really good part from the EASA. I wanted to use the European Advertising Standards Alliance, because it reflects a lot of countries and basically gives you an idea of how all these countries do have the same codes. Even though the UK is not in the EU anymore, we are still part of the EASA because it is a geographical organization and not a political one. So it still very much applies if you're looking at the EASA. So basically they're saying that all products, all claims have to be substantiated. They need to be able to be objectively judged. So exactly like you kind of end up with here, you can see really clearly this percent of people agree with this claim out of this many people. So it's very nicely to objectively judge. And you need to be able to produce it without delay. So this is something I always like to bring up because I know a lot of people, well, I know a lot of brands that kind of go on the market with claims and think, well, we'll see if we can get away with it. And if they, you know, if they pick up on it and I get in trouble, I can sort of retrospectively do the study, which sometimes you can. It really depends on your timeline. But generally, if you're looking at a study, say it's 2 weeks long, we need to send the products out to the volunteers. We need to conduct the study for 2 weeks. We need to get the results in. You're looking at a delay in providing that evidence. So it's really important to make sure you've done it before you put your product onto market. So I want to give some examples of removed adverts as well. We've done the whole what you should do, but we haven't got any what you shouldn't do. And this, I thought these were really good articles as well, because they're both from Australia. So when I was kind of looking at top articles about misleading claims on electronic products, a lot was coming from Australia, which really shows that they are cracking down over the last few years on these kinds of claims as well. So it's always good to sort of think about which markets are maybe increasing their regulations and really hunting things out. But yeah, there's two of the largest players in the game, LG and Samsung, are both getting in a lot of trouble and having to pay a lot of money about false claims. So LG, they were in trouble basically about the guarantee rights. So this is where I talked about earlier about the European warranty. There's the same in Australia. They've got the same thing. So LG was saying, you know, you've got no rights to the guarantee, but they didn't mention that actually as an Australian citizen, they do have some kind of rights there as well. And it basically just misleading what the law is behind it. And Samsung had got in trouble about water-resistant phone claims. So basically, they showed in their advert the phone underwater, but actually it's not that resistant to water. So people were using it while surfing and swimming, and obviously it was breaking. So I mean, I don't know. I think phone kind of development has really improved, where you can get it a little bit wet and it's not going to die, but you really shouldn't submerge it in water for a long time. And that's how they felt they could use that product. So it just shows how you can be innocent as well about, you know, these kinds of things. You don't always know what's going on, but you need to be so aware of the law, because this is the worst thing, is you get this really bad publicity about your product when these things are going into the news as well. So I've got a couple of things just to go through, and then I'm going to go to a question and answer. So the first thing is just to talk about us a bit more, Ayton Global Research, and why you should use us to use your consumer studies. So we're an award-winning research agency. We've won awards for family business, international business, and we're very, very proud of that. We're fully compliant with the GDPR. Of course, we have to be by law, but we really carry this over into other countries as well, and making sure that we have the best data protection possible. We've got an ISO 27001 to be audited on that, and we have our own data protection officer in-house. This is because we have volunteers' data, which is very sensitive, but we also have your really sensitive intellectual property as well, like things like your ingredients lists. We have full undesirable event reporting, probably not as necessary for consumer electronics, but we still need to be able to give these volunteers the opportunity to report any adverse reactions they're having, any undesirable events. We've got full product liability insurance. That does come into real play, especially when we're looking at consumer electronics, because these are really, they can be quite dangerous if people don't use them properly. So if we have any issues with the instructions we're providing those volunteers, we're already protected in this test format. We've got an ISO 9001, which is about our quality assurance. We're a market research society partner, so our research is ethical as well as properly conducted. We get training from them. You get bespoke regulatory advice. That's where I come in, and you also get a designated study manager. So you just have one point of contact that gets to know you and your company and your research objectives really well to make sure everything's really smooth for you. So just kind of a few little FAQs before I go to the question and answer. We always say a panel size starting at 100 responses because it's a really good number for robust data and generally accepted by most marketing platforms. It is important to consider if you're going to have any subgroups, we need to make sure there's a significant number in each subgroup. So there's a lot of other things to consider, but basically it just really gives you a good idea of where to start when people are like, I have no idea how many people should be in a consumer test. I've talked about product liability insurance, but we also need to make sure the samples have to be safety tested, especially electronics, things like a PAT test. We need to make sure that they're safe to use by the consumer, essentially. For blind studies, which is your claim substantiation, they need to be debranded. So really important we don't reveal the brand because we can't have biased results. And you always need to make sure your questionnaire design will support your claims. As I was saying earlier, we need to make sure they're verbatim to the claim. And we can also provide some really good help on questionnaire design. So I'd love to go to the Q&A now. If anybody's got any questions, please feel free to type them in. I'd be really happy to answer. If you've not got any questions right now, but you do have a burgeoning question later on, I will be sending out this recording and supplying my contact details in that follow-up email. So if you have anything you want to ask on email, please feel free to. I'm aware that I've been chatting away, so there might be a few questions that have come up out of that. And there's probably things that I haven't even covered that are really important. So please feel free to ask questions because it's really just a summary. At the end of the day, as I said, this is a huge industry. There's lots of different types of products. So there's going to be some really specific advice we can give for those products. But yeah, we'll see. I don't think I see any questions coming in. I don't want to hold everyone up too much. So I'm going to close that. But if you do type something in, I'll grab it quickly. So just to finish up, some upcoming webinars. I've been talking a lot about panel sizes recently, and that is the webinar next week. And I'll be joined by my German franchisee, Thomas Marquardt, as well. He's got some really good insight into panel sizes with his experience as well as mine. So we can really talk about that in detail. How do we decide this? Where does it come from? What's the legislation, but what's the best in terms of analysis as well? There's also cosmetic trends for 2021 in a couple of weeks' time. So I'll be joined again by Thomas, but also by Macon from Brazil. So we'll be having a bit of an insight from the UK, EU and Brazil as well, to give you some ideas, some cosmetic trends that are going to be coming up and how do we substantiate those kinds of claims. So the SDS training as well, I just want to give you some point your attention to the SDS, Society of Cosmetic Scientists. They've got their distance learning course on the essentials of cosmetic science. If that is something that interests you, you can sign up on their website there. And we'll be having the 32nd IFSCC Congress in September in 2022, and you can register your interest for that now. There's my contact information, but as I said, I'll be following up with an email. Thank you very much for joining today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from you all, and have a fantastic weekend. Bye.